My name is Paul Farvar, and I have the privilege today of interviewing my friend, who I've known for over 20, 30 years maybe now, author, entrepreneur, and friend, Parham Parastaran. Welcome
Thank you.
to my office.
And I think it's more like 30 some years.
Yeah, I didn't want to tell people
You were like
to figure out.
You were 8.
I don't want people to figure out my age because, it's not cool.
Actually,
but-
it's 38 years.
All right. No, that can't be right.
Yeah,
But we'll
you were 8,
we'll agree to
7, 8.
disagree. So I want to start off by saying you wrote this amazing book called Perfect Pain, and when you first told me you were writing the book, I didn't know what to expect. In fact, I read a lot of memoirs and autobiographies. That's what I spend a lot of my time on. You know that. And I've never known you to be a person who reads books, let alone write one. And so when you asked me to look at a first edition, I recall I was on a trip to go to Los Angeles, and I had maybe 3 hours of sleep. I was like, I'll take it on the plane, and I'll just read it to help me fall asleep. And I didn't sleep on that trip. That whole ride, that whole flight, I read your whole book, and I think I remember calling you when I landed and saying how amazing it was and how proud and surprised I was at the book. I mean, there were so many things that you revealed in that book that I didn't even know, knowing you for over 30 years.
It was 3 years ago, August.
Okay.
I was on a family vacation when I actually called me and I couldn't respond.
Yeah, you told
And
me.
I said, I can't. And I said, can you text me or something of that sort? And you said, just call me when you can. And then I'm thinking, oh, he's read the book and he's not revealing something, and I was one of those oh shit moments, like,
Yeah.
and I knew how you can kind of be critical, and so,
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons I gave you the book,
Right.
in the first way. So I gave you it because I knew I would get an honest opinion, but you're also highly critical,
Yes.
demanding, however you want to say it.
Demanding.
So I remember that vividly. I was actually standing with my wife. I was about to go to dinner. My brother was there. It was a family vacation with my brother, and so finally you texted and said, just call me. I said, is it about the book? You said, yes, and then you wouldn't say anything more.
Right.
And I just kept saying, well, just give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, give me something.
Right.
And then you wrote a beautiful text that made my entire night. In fact, I remember ordering a really expensive bottle of wine that night for dinner because I was happy, and basically it was what you just said, and it was just
Yeah.
you were surprised, and you just said I really enjoyed it.
Pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
I
was pleasantly surprised. That
Yeah.
you were pleasantly surprised.
I mean, it was having never written a book. This is your first time out, and I know how hard it is to write myself as a writer in different capacities. And I couldn't believe how amazing your voice came along. For people that don't know you, it actually came across pretty fairly,
Like-
as if you were telling a story,
Yeah.
or multiple stories, I should say. But what? How did you see? You never told anyone you were writing this book, so
I
how
did.
did you even start?
It was so at that time when you saw it, it was basically about 6 years ago, five and a half years ago right now. So when you saw it, I was done. It wasn't 100% done because you actually helped me quite a bit through the
went through
the last stage of it, but it was for the most part it was done. Everything was done, and I started writing it by myself, and I had named the book before I even wrote the first chapter. It was I was in the deep part of therapy, and I think that happens at some points in therapy with people. And for me at that point, I think I had been in therapy for 11 years. And it was just one of those moments I had that I literally just remember going to the computer and I thought of what I wanted to express. And it's as if the whole book was kind of like inside me. I actually even named the book before I even wrote it. And the whole kind of thing, like I just saw like all the chapters kind of laid out and what I wanted to do it. So I just started writing, and it started off as just maybe cathartic. It started off as therapeutic, obviously. It started off as kind of fun, just writing, because I've always liked being creative, and I've always
Right.
liked that. I just never had moments and opportunities to really like present my creativity. And so it just kind of started, and then it went. And so I didn't tell a lot of people. I told nobody. I mean, my wife knew, and she was skeptical. She was reading, and she's like, why do you want to tell a story about some
Yeah.
deep stuff and difficult stuff? And I just felt like I needed to. Now, at that point, I wasn't 100% sure this is something I really want the public to read or whatever. Whether it was just for me, whether it was for my friends, whether it was for everything. But it was just something I absolutely 100% was all in. And usually, when I'm really wanting to do something, I don't tell people because that kind of, yeah.
Well, you said you had the title of the book. You said you had the title of the book, Perfect Pain, from beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What do you mean by that?
Well, I don't want to. Basically, the idea of Perfect Pain was that I'm telling a story of some of my life experiences, which not all were great. In comparison, it pales to a lot of other people's life. I still consider myself a pretty ordinary life, okay? But there were some things that were difficult. There were challenges that I had, and but the idea of the perfect pain came that I had a moment, and like I said, this was a part of the period of therapy I was in, that I felt like all the pain that I had or all the difficulties that I had were frankly perfect. And that was the title. And I wanted to tell a story of how some people might look at some of the things that happened and some of the experiences that I had as, extraordinary or difficult or challenging. And the way I saw it was, thank God that it was that much pain and it wasn't maybe anything worse. It wasn't so, the pain wasn't so bad. It wasn't so incredible that somehow I could have went to the other spectrum and really not been here talking to you about it. Where I felt like I had enough trouble that it actually helped me, that it actually made that it was going to make my life better going forward. But it wasn't so much trouble that I literally went into the gutter or just I don't.
It made you who you are today.
And I was good with that. It was a point that I was just like, that is all our experiences, all the things that happened. That is who we are.
Yeah, and you talk candidly about your childhood. I mean, you grew up in Iran during a tumultuous time,
the revolution,
the revolution in Iran, and you also had some personal childhood experiences that you're very candid about as a child, things that most people don't have to go through, and you
Right.
kind of downplay. You say people have had it worse, but you had a pretty rough childhood with sexual assault as a child.
Yeah, I did, and at the time it was it was just something that was in some ways blocked out. That in some ways I didn't really put a lot of thought into it, and but obviously it was doing damage. It was doing internal damage, and never really confronting it or never really talking about it. And it was very important for me to write about it, especially being a man. Especially being a man, I think it was something that I think most men, especially Iranians and
Right.
and a father of 3 girls, would have a hard time wanting to talk about. But it was really important for me to be able to talk about it and not necessarily downplay it. I wasn't trying to downplay it. I was just trying to say it is part of what it is. It doesn't need to be the most enormous, life-ending, traumatic experience that I can't function for the rest of my life. It's just part of who I am. I'm not embarrassed, and I think a lot of people are embarrassed. And,
Right.
and at this point, there was nothing that I was embarrassed because it was the most important thing to me was truth and everything being real.
Well, you say there is shame for victims of sexual assault as children or any type of sexual assault, but also you mentioned being Iranian. What do you mean by that? I mean, I know what you mean, but can you tell the people that are watching what you mean by how there's an extra level with Iran?
I think the way, I would, maybe Iranians would disagree, but the way I'm thinking of it is Iranian men are macho, manly, and this is something that if you were sexually assaulted as a kid, it's almost like it's your fault. How can a man let this happen to him, and how can those kind of things. And I think that's how I think of it. Let alone the fact that it's with another man. And it's troubling enough. I think Iranian people in general would have a very hard time with non-heterosexual relationships,
Right.
especially. I think about like a father or a mother of a young boy in that light, and I think that's probably the closest I can explain what I mean by the fact that it was Iranian. Culturally, it was just really cultural.
Right. And speaking of which, you don't really spend a lot of time in the book talking about being Iranian or an Iranian American. Is that purposely, or is that something that just you noticed?
I regret it. I actually regret that. if I could go back, which I'm not going to, the publishers and the editor would kill me right now. But I think if I was going to do it again, I would have spent more time on that. I think I purposely passed over it. And this is a theme in the book. I think I've had other test readers tell me this, and I definitely know you did, because that was when you helped me refine some of the writing and the chapters and the thoughts that were in the book. Your biggest comments constantly were, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And I didn't want to make a book of stories. A lot of people write stories. A lot of people write stories about alcoholism or addiction and, you know, overcoming these things and whatever. A lot of people do this thing. I really thought if I put too much stories, too much detail, too much Iranian theme, too much of any one theme, I would take away with why I wrote the book, and that was the message. I had a very clear intent with the message that I wanted, and I thought too many stories, too much of that would then turn it into just a book of somebody who has stories to tell, and the message get lost. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you say that the message to you is very important, and you don't like the designation of books that are memoirs, and you didn't want this book to be called a memoir. And I remember you and I talking about that. Yep. Why is that?
Again, I think it's the designation, because from everything that I've learned and see that are in memoirs, I think of memoirs of like somebody famous or somebody that's like incredibly accomplished, then going back and telling their story of you know, and I know it's not a biography, but I think of it like a memoir in terms of like a biography, and somebody going and telling stories of accomplishments and describing how they got through these things. I think of myself as a fairly ordinary guy, and the memoir to me makes it seem, when I think about a memoir, I think I'm not worthy of a memoir. And then I also want, I almost want it to be in a self, like, I have a really hard time trying to put that in a category where I also want it to feel like it's a deeper message, a story. It's kind of like I want to talk about a message and some deeper thoughts, except I have to use stories to take the reader into where some of my challenges were, and that'll make my message better and be able to, you know, to shine more light on the message. And I have to use stories to do it, rather than thinking a book of just telling all these crazy stories, because I have more stories I can tell.
Right.
So the whole Iranian thing could be literally an entire book on itself, as you know. Coming into the late 70s, early 80s into the United States from Iran was not an easy time, because obviously we had the hostage crisis going on, and there were so many reasons that you did not want to be Iranian. And I could write a book basically talking about that experience.
Well, there's a lot of people that are experiencing the same thing that Iranians felt in that time. Right now, other cultures that are experiencing the struggles of being an American immigrant. And I think the fact that you don't stress being Iranian in the book can allow other immigrants to relate to your story.
Yeah, no doubt. And as I said, I regret it. I think if I went back, I would probably highlight it a little more, because I think it's important. I think a lot of people could relate to the fact that it is difficult coming from another country to the United States. While to me, it's an amazing country to come to, because at the end of the day, I get to write a book. Yeah. You know, in many other countries, I might not be in this position. I had it, you know, so from that standpoint, it's great. But I think the biggest thing is where I say I regret it is that there's another story to be told of that challenge, of that difficulty of being an immigrant. It's just this here. I just didn't want to mess it up. Take it away.
Well, you say there's another story to be told, and in addition to the fact, going back to what you said about memoirs, is you think of people that are highly accomplished and you're not deserving of this. You are highly accomplished. You are essentially, the whole book is a story of a self-made man, of somebody who came from nothing and created this opportunity. So why don't you accept the fact that you
I'm not famous.
Right.
I'm not famous. You know, I'm a first-time author. No one's going to know who I am. And so, yes, you're right. But that's what I mean.
But your story is inspirational to a lot of people.
I hope.
In the sense, and is that something that you?
Absolutely.
Is that something you wanted? You wanted to create an inspirational.
I want to create a conversation. You know, I hope many people would read it and relate to it, and ordinary people. You know, one of the original names I was going to call it was Ordinary Pain, instead of Perfect. And the reason why I wanted to call it Ordinary Pain is because I wanted to depict myself as somebody that it could be anyone that's reading the book. It could be you. It could be anybody. And the fact that it could be somebody, that it could be anybody, makes it much more applicable to the mass population. So, for example, if you're reading a book about Jackie Robinson, okay, that's an extraordinary story, right? Most people can read it and be amazed by it, right? But they can't relate to it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in this case, I wanted to I would think that the masses, the ordinary people, can relate to it because it could be anybody. It can be your cousin. It can be your best friend. It could be a story that you know somebody that's had similar things going on.
You're blatantly honest in this book. Does that worry you?
I'm blatantly honest, and it doesn't worry me because it's the only way I can be authentic. And my entire goal is in developing myself. And the only way you can develop yourself is by being authentic.
People close to you are going to read this book, myself included, who had no idea about some of the things that you were struggling with and that you had to deal with. Are you ready for that response?
I'm ready for the response from people that have no idea of some of the things that they're going to read about, but I'm not making a hypothesis of what that's going to be and how I'm going to react to it. It's just going to be whatever it is, and I think that's part of my mental health recovery is that I don't really care. I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but it's not something that is going to impact me one way or the other.
You talk a lot about your relationship with your parents and being a parent yourself. I know that's important to you. You spend a lot of time on that in the book. Is there a reason you're doing that in the book?
I do. I mean, I spend a lot of time talking about parenting, and what I want from parents is to be a little more self-aware and to really understand, okay, and to really be aware of the impact that they have on kids, whether they're 1 year old, 2, 3, 4, 5, that the incredible power that they exert over how they shape the way kids think, feel, and all these things. But really the crux of it is I want parents to let kids be allowed to feel what they want to feel. Don't manipulate what they could cry about or not cry about. Don't tell somebody, don't be sad. Don't tell somebody, be tough. Don't let them be what they are going to be, and it will all work out.
You talk about self-awareness. What do you mean by self-awareness?
Self-awareness to me is when you're observing, and in my book I use the word observing ego, which is a psychological term, but self-awareness is you being aware of your behaviors and action and sort of like looking from above. And whether you and I are having this conversation and simultaneously I can look above, and when I leave the room and analyze, how was my behavior? What did I say? Was I respectful? Was I humble? Did I listen? Did I look somebody in the eye? Being aware of those. Those are very superficial, very 1.0 sort of self-awareness thing. But then of course you learn to be self-aware and you get to a deeper level of self-awareness. And understanding could get very complicated. Understanding your role in society, understanding your role in your community, self-awareness of your role and spiritually, and all these things, and just spending time thinking about your behaviors and yourself rather than just going and plowing and moving forward. Reflection.
You spent a lot of time talking about your childhood in this book, and you had an unextraordinary childhood with some painful incidents, as well as having to start a new life at a very young age.
Yeah.
Why was that important to you to share in this book?
Because it was important for me to share some of those childhood experiences that you might say that are difficult and challenging, is because I wanted to share that it's possible to find a place, a home for that in your soul, and move forward. And it doesn't mean you put it in a place and deflect it and never think about it. It means that you integrate it into who you are. And painful things, just like happy things, have to be integrated into who you are. And that's how you become one, as opposed to conflicted.
And what was the purpose, I guess, of writing this book then?
being authentic, which is the most important thing to me in life, and self-aware and developing as a human and getting as close to achieving self-actualization, means you have to be honest with everything, even if it's possible at the risk of maybe your family never talking to you again, or at the risk of your friends looking at you funny, or at the risk of how my children would look, well, of just any loved one might look at you, was actually the most empowering thing. When I actually was ready to be okay with all of that, made me feel the most real I've ever felt in my entire life.
Almost freed you.
It's freedom. It was a very, very empowering.
Why? What is proper mirroring to you?
Mirroring is if I were to hold a mirror in front of you, that you actually see yourself, and you don't see what I want you to see. So if I don't properly mirror, then you will see what it is that your parents want you to be, as opposed to you to be how you want to be.
And do you think that's something that you didn't have as a child?
Yes.
And how did that affect you?
You can't find your true identity, and on top of it, you're always searching. Instead of the things that feel good for you and the things that give you internal deeper strength, you're always finding strength from external areas. The way your parents might look at you, the words that they use, the facial gestures, all of those things impact, and they will wrongfully take you in a path that's not one of your own.
Is that something you're very aware of now with your children?
Very.
Okay. And how is it that how did you learn about this mirroring and
14 years of psychoanalysis. I mean, really, I don't think I would have done it without it. And that's the other message of the book, is just that I deeply, deeply believe in the power of really going to the core of things. If you're an alcoholic, if you're a drug addict, if you're a workaholic, whatever, and you're obsessed in some neurotic way, is not focusing on the behavior and focusing on the why. And as you delve into the why and peel that onion deeper and deeper and deeper, you go down to some of the bare sources of it. And a lot of them aren't pretty. They're not pretty in psychoanalysis. It doesn't feel good. It's not a happy kind of therapy. But it's one that you got to do and get through with it. And I'm a huge advocate of it. And I'm certain, to your point with the children, I'm certain that I'm a better dad is because, for starters, I am very comfortable with them reading a story about a dad that for a long time was a terrible dad. I was a terrible husband. I was a terrible person narcissistically terrible in so many ways. But I want them to know how imperfect that was, because that frees them from them not having to be perfect. I don't want them to go be perfect. And I'm hoping that this frees them from ever feeling pressure that they have to act, and achieve a certain way of life.
Psychoanalysis is a very important message in this book. Why is that important to you?
Yeah. Psychoanalysis is really important to me because it's the only thing that I found that is dealing with a deeper why. And it's always asking why. It kind of never stops asking why. And it's like, the peeling of the onion and really getting to the source of things. If you're an alcoholic, if you're a drug addict, any of those type of things, workaholic, right? Psychoanalysis is really trying to find out why. And it never really ends, right? It never really ends. But it goes into a discovery process of really deep down of how and why you are the way you are. It's not pretty. It's not a fun way to go. It's not a fun way to, that type of therapy is very difficult. Which is why most people don't do it, and which is my message, which is, I think it's one of the only ways to really get down to the deeper source of it. And it's very important to me from me being a better parent and a better father, because if I raise my kids a little bit mentally healthier, then their kids will be, and this gen that I'll pass that along.
Other than what you said about psychoanalysis, is there anything else you want people to get out of this book?
I want people to get out of the book that nothing is so bad. Nothing is so bad that you need to use it as an excuse, or you need to use it as a blockade into you overcoming it. The decisions and how you get out of dark places is up to you. Is really up to you. And what I really want people to get out of it is hope. Is that, maybe they have a loved one that they're struggling with, that they just can't figure out how to right that ship. And not that I put a book of instructions of how to do it, but I certainly tell you that there are steps to do it, and steps that I get. And I was lucky enough to somehow stick with the steps, because I could have quit a long time ago. But the message again, and what I really want them to get out of it is that you've got to dig deeper and you got to get to the whys. You got to ask why, and you can't just accept, well, it's because my parents were alcoholics or because of this. It's why.
I know you're very proud of this book and you're proud of your psychoanalysis, and you downplay your own life in this book a little bit, and what you've achieved on your own. Are there other things in your life that you're proud of in terms of your personal achievements?
Yeah, I think my marriage and my 3 kids. I mean, without a doubt, those are probably the most proud things I got. I mean, it's I'm of course proud with some business accomplishments and things like that. But the fact that I'm married, going through all of this stuff, and having as strong a marriage that I've ever had, and having as great a relationship that I have with my children, if I died today, I don't think I've lived a full life, because I think that's been probably I think it's lucky in some ways. I can't tell if I got lucky. I can't tell. It just somehow all worked out. But the fact that I have the type of relationships I have with my wife and 3 kids, and I can't ever downplay, probably the second proudest thing I'd have to put really close to that is some of the friendships that I have. Yourself, and some of my other close friends and people like that. That's a big deal. I sometimes value that as much as anything, because I feel it's rare to go to life and then I have so many close friends and so many people that I can really love and count on, and I'm proud of that. And I feel like I had to have played a role in that, so I take credit for some of that.
And you keep telling the listeners and the viewers that you're just a regular guy, but you did do a lot in your professional life when you were really young. What are your proudest moments as in your professional career?
When I was 13 and I franchised the lemonade stand to make money to go to Great America. That was I had moments like that. I think really it was probably my teaching days of tennis.
Yeah.
I mean, of course you can say business was good, and I built a business. But what I did with the tennis kids and that period of my life that I was teaching was arguably the most rewarding time I've ever had in my life, and it was a proud moment, but it was something that I learned how to do. I never was a tennis coach. I was a tennis player, but I learned to be a tennis coach, and I learned to really change and affect these people's lives and these kids' lives, and that I don't think that I guess what's the right way to say, I was able to affect these kids' lives to the point where I still hear from them when they come back, and that's, to me, is worth more than anything, more than any money, is anything that you can accomplish, because it affected people's lives, and I'm proud of that.
But what's next then? What do you got planned after this?
Well, hopefully hopefully some people read the book and it does what I think it might do if it gets in the hands of the correct people, and hopefully start a platform for me for some form of advocate work and some work in the psychoanalytical, working with kids and for parents and kids to take mental health a little bit more seriously, not just seriously in the sense that they're aware of it, but really causing changes in the way maybe schools do things and the way we think about depression at an early age. And so that would be something that could really inspire me to really get after. I'm also working on another business of making some business applications with some of the concepts and things that when I was in business myself, tools that I felt businesses could use, and that's just a sort of a secondary career in the technology world, but we'll see with that.
All right. Thank you for your time, and that's Parham Parastaran's book, Perfect Pain.